Hey, hey, hey. It's Filter Free Friday, y'all. Listen, I am so glad y'all here. I was asked to go live right after the election results came out, and I decided against it because um, I have learned that if at all possible, when I'm working through my own emotions, um, to wait, to be able to say something. And I'm apologizing because I know I'm a little bit early today, but I am working on this lovely Friday. But I also one other disclaimer is I am going to be describing an issue, not judging it. When I was a little girl, I am again the sixth child of seven kids. Y'all probably tired of hearing me say that, but I think it informs so much of how I show up in the world. And, if you've ever had that many siblings, if y'all ate chicken, that the adults in general get the adults and older children get white meat and the children get legs. And I don't like dark meat chicken. I never have, and I still really don't. Like it's got to be really hidden in something for me to eat it. And I used to always get the legs, and on those days, I would only eat the skin of the chicken, or I would just eat the sides because I hated dark meat chicken. Fast forward, of course, I have one child, and I think there are many reasons why that is. Before my one child, we would just compromise on what food would look like because I remembered what it was like to not have the chicken I wanted. And so therefore, I just think people should be able to eat the food they want to eat. I think this is true in schools. I think this should be true in cafeterias. I think this should be true when my vegetarian friends come over. Um, that people should be able to eat, if a Hindu folk person come to my house, I'm not feeding them beef, right? Like there's, ways to go about this thing. Also, when you are the sixth child of seven, you don't get to sit in the front seat of the car. Again, I'm just describing. I think anybody who knows me and has known me for a long time knows I ain't spent no time complaining about this. I'm just describing. So I wait, I'm looking forward to my opportunity to sit in the front of the car. Um, you might also remember that they started saying that you had to be 12 to sit in the front of the car. So, once I turned 12, I got to sit in the front, sometimes, but my brother Joe was 16, so he had to not be in the car for me to be able to sit in the front. All right, everybody else was gone, but if Joe was there, I wasn't gonna get to sit in the front. So I had to wait till Joe was driving his own car, which wasn't 16, it was, more like 17 for him. So 13, I'm sitting in the front of the car. My little sister turned about 5 or 6, and she wanted to sit in the front of the car. Now the rule is that the older person gets to sit in the front of the car. My sister turned 6. She wanted to sit in the front of the car. Guess who got to sit in the front of the car? My sister did. And I remember being disappointed as a child. But then, just like everything else in my life, I just kind of said, you know what? When I get my own stuff, when I have my own children, I'm not gonna do this. This was my thinking that when I got into a position of authority, I wasn't gonna do it this way. But I learned a very valuable lesson, and that is that there are such things as favorites. And when there are favorites, rules don't make sense. Rules don't even apply. In fact, I'm still excited about that comedy show, by the way. When I did that comedy show, one of my opening statement was about favorites, and I got an opportunity the day after the election to chat with a friend, and she had a major epiphany about favorites because once you understand that there are favorites and what I like to say is unfavorites, so many more things make sense. And why am I bringing that up? Because when things don't make sense to you, you can't practice empathy. And I just want to clarify that empathy does not mean understanding. It does not mean empathy does not mean being nice. Empathy does not mean being kind. Sometimes empathetic people are nice and kind, but it does not mean that. Empathy means I understand what another person is thinking. I understand what they feel. Sometimes I feel what they feel. And now I know how to better act because I have a deep understanding of what's going on. That's why I made this pivot to empathy. Because without understanding, you can't make the next right decision. And so I remember when I got my first job, or when I got my first professional job in Hallmark, that when I would go to the diversity, equity, and inclusion events, I could not believe how people were talking about it because to me it seemed like they didn't understand the concepts of favorites, that they didn't understand that there were certain people inside the organization who were perceived to be, whether people knew it or not, because I don't know that my mother was conscious, right? That there was a favorite thing going on. So regardless of if people knew it or not, there was favorites. How do you know who's the favorites? Look at who's in authority. Look who gets the best chicken. Look who gets to sit shotgun in the car, right? Like when you understand that and you see it, then there ain't no question. And once you understand who the favorites are, you understand that you got to move differently. If you want to be able to ride in the front of the car, if you want to be able to get your favorite piece of chicken. You see, when they want to have a party, when my parents are out of town and they don't want me to say nothing, next time we have chicken, I better get the piece of chicken I want. Or else everybody gonna know about this party. How do I get there? You either fuss with your parents or you negotiate with your siblings. And is there a third option? Yeah, you can run away if you want to. I have siblings who, when things didn't go their way, they would go years without talking to my mother, or they would run away. You can do that. You can always opt out. That's always an option. But if you got to live in that house, you have to understand the favorite system so that you can navigate the favorite system. So when I left a job I loved, um, one of the first things that I did when because I knew I had to be I needed a book to be able to be a keynote speaker. I had started working on a book about diversity and inclusion in a more what I call authentic way to approach it because I understand the concept of favoritism. And I wasn't writing a book about diversity because I wanted to create a business about diversity. My study has been about leadership. Now, if you are a leader, if you have authority, if you are a parent, you understand how to make sure everybody feels like they belong if you want a peaceful house, if you want an organization that works well. And so when I wrote one thing that I wish I could go back and do differently, when I wrote Lively Paradox, I named the book after my company. And the subtitle is An Authentic Perspective on Issues of Diversity and Inclusion. So after the election results, there were two people who know me fairly well who reached out to me and said, "Hey, I think you need to pivot your organization because um, DEI is dead." Well, first of all, in 2020, I was the one letting people know, hey, look, do y'all understand how favors work? This ain't how you should present this information because if you present it this way, it is going to fail and when nobody listening to me. And you think I don't know that diversity, equity, and inclusion does not is not something that the favorites appreciate? Like, do you think my siblings would have appreciated if my mama said, I'm gonna cut this breast up three ways and make it smaller so that sometimes the younger children can get um, some white meat when they want it? No. And then I got siblings who don't even like white meat. I've learned that as an adult. They were just taking advantage of the white meat because it was beneficial to them. See? So when I got those calls this week, I was like, my business is a leadership development business. Um, in 2021, I realized that I needed to pivot towards empathy because if you don't understand how chicken gets distributed when there's favorites, if you don't understand how shotgun works when there's favorites, you're not going to understand how any of this works. Why people don't always follow the rules, why certain people get opportunities, why other people need laws for them, why other people need special programs for them. You ain't gonna understand none of that. You're not gonna understand it. And so, shortly after I wrote Lively Paradox, I came back with an empathy book, The Power of 7 Second Chances, an empathetic approach to organizational success. Because what I realized, I said, look, racism and anti-racism is like calculus. And most adults have a pre-algebra understanding at best. So you can't just start talking to people about racism and white supremacy because it ain't gonna work. You got to get them, even if they married to people who know calculus, even if they love calculus, even if they understand that calculus is necessary in order for planes to fly, that don't make them ready for calculus, honey. And so why y'all pushing people in? But I read a book. Why you pushing people into calculus and ain't ready? It's called Change or Die. And they were like, Nicole, facts, figures, and force ain't never made nobody do nothing. And that's hard for an engineer to get their mind wrapped around. You see, because when you are focused on facts, you ain't moving people. When you look at how many policies got approved that were more blue leaning in nature, but then the highest office of the land went to someone who was definitely red leaning in nature, then if you focused on logic, honey, it ain't gonna help you. You gotta understand empathy. You gotta put your mind into the minds of people who want the white meat chicken, even if they don't even like it, because it keeps them in their position of power. And see, I don't value positionality. It's not a big deal for me. In fact, if somebody else could run my business and I could report to that person, it would be fantastic, because then I could just teach leaders how to be better at their job. But for people who value positionality, who think that if they are not at the top, that something is wrong, I'm not saying that value is off, but you got to understand that thinking. And then all of this makes sense. And then you're not surprised by things. You'd be disappointed, see. And then after I wrote The Power of 7 Second Chances to help people understand empathy, then I said, you know what? The opposite of hate is not love. People think that. That's why they don't like this idea of empathy. The opposite of empathy is indifference. Hatefulness thrives because most people are indifferent. Do you know how many millions of people sat this one out? The numbers are almost 24 people who contributed their point of view in 2020 sat this one out in 2024. When you understand that hatefulness will thrive, that a lack of empathy causes people to be indifferent, then you will be disappointed, yes, but never surprised. So as I got older, right? As I got older, I had my own son, and I'm thinking, I forgot, right? I forgot to put myself in the shoes of a person who values positionality. And honestly, I have no idea what it's like to be a parent and have multiple children. Me and my son, we argue a lot. We the same person and we still argue all the time. And I wonder what it would be like if I had another child who was more agreeable, whose personality was more suited to mine, who, just worship the little ground I walk on, because that ain't my child, honey. And so would I, in subtle ways, defer to my other child? I don't know. So with that, I have a lot of mercy and grace for people who have multiple children, and even for my own parents. But let me tell you what, I was shocked when I had my son and those favoritism actions trickled down. I thought, without us even dealing with it, that somehow or another, that my son was going to get fair treatment, that he was going to be, you know what I'm saying? He wasn't getting in trouble in school, he's involved in sports. I thought, oh, yes. I didn't even realize I thought it, but I felt like my position had changed. I did. And then I remember one Christmas, we had been driving over to my mother's house for my son could share his PlayStation with his cousins. And we were doing it every day because he wanted to share his PlayStation with his cousins. He didn't have nobody he could play with. And this was totally fine, didn't think nothing of it. And then Christmas came, my mom bought my sister's children a PlayStation. They lived with her. I hope you can tell that there is zero hurt around this for me. I am just describing. I am I, I am not judging. But my sister's children didn't want to share their PlayStation with my son. And I looked at my mother. I said, "Mom, Khalid's been bringing his PlayStation over here forever. You're gonna make these kids share, right?" And she said, I can remember it like it was yesterday. She said, "Well, they get to choose if they want to share or not." And I was livid. My friend said to me, "Are you surprised or are you disappointed?" And I had to sit back in my chair. And I had to sit back in my chair because I was disappointed. I had been living with this structure, with this system, with this who's favorite, who has proximity to privilege my whole life. And somehow with my own son, I forgot. I I don't I forgot. And because I had forgotten, I couldn't tap into the empathy necessary to be able to understand what my next move would be, which is to prepare my child for what the reality of the world is like. Because when you don't understand reality or when you're fighting against reality, you're going to lose. Not sometime, 100% of the time, baby. You're going to lose. And so to understand that I was my daddy's favorite, but not necessarily my mama's, is to understand what happened. Is to understand what happened and to know that yes, that does trickle down over generations. And when we look at what's going on in our country, we be thinking that somehow without us addressing an issue, that it's just gonna get better because these young people today, they better. How they better? Did you do something to make them better? Did you do something to make it different? You didn't, sugar. You didn't. And so I then said, okay, because I forget what they tell me in Change or Die. So I keep thinking, let me try it a different way. So I wrote another little book. I start recognizing people don't read. So I wrote a book and I put pictures in it and it takes only 20 minutes to read and the words are big. I said, okay, and I'm gonna tell it in the form of an analogy. And then people get it. It's called Cultivating Culture as a Garden, Reaping the Harvest of Difference and Inclusion. And in this book, I talk about how when you're going into a space where something has never been done before, it's hard work. It takes a lot of energy, passion, and commitment. That the learning is going to be one way, and then those are tillers in a garden, right? And then I said, when you think of tillers, those are people like Jackie Robinson. Those are people like the Martin Luther Kings of the world. Those are people like Eddie Tolson, who ran in the first Black man to run track in the Olympics, even before Jesse Owens. Nobody even know Eddie Tolson's name because he was a tiller. He made way for Jesse Owens. Then when you think about what else you need for a garden, you need people who plant. This is most people, right? There's somebody else goes in and is the first somebody else gonna go in and do the hard work. Then people can plant. It's much easier to plant things. Most people are planters because somebody else has paved the way for them. But if all you do is till and plant, what happens? Any good gardener knows that the thing that's going to happen is you're going to end up with a whole bunch of weeds because you can't just sit on the bed of the joy of planting. You got to have weed pullers, those people who go deep, force you to go further. Those people who say, no, we have not gotten there yet. You can't. It's like riding up a hill. If you take your foot off the pedal, you're going to backtrack. And that's what we see backtracking when you see the overturning of the Voting Rights Act. That's what you see when you see the Dobbs decision. It's a backtracking of sorts, right? You got to keep pedaling. And you got tillers and planters and weed pullers. And guess what else you got? People who want to eat the fruits and vegetables who ain't never going to do nothing. All they're going to do is sit on the side and scream into the atmosphere and complain. The people who are observing. And if you want to reap the benefits of a garden, and you got to have tillers and planters and weed pullers, and you got to ignore those people on the sidelines who ain't doing nothing. But this was just a different way of sharing facts, honey. What was I thinking? It's just a different way of sharing facts. It didn't work. So I then said, forget it. I'm just going to talk to the people who want to talk to me. Rewrote Dangerous Indifference and called it Culturally Responsive Leadership. Overcoming Indifference in Organizations. This book is completely focused on the difference in your organization is already there. I ain't even going to worry about the people who don't read no more. I'm just going to be narrow and focus on the people who care about this. And guess what? Still wasn't working. So I said, forget all of it. And I'm just going to write about the stuff I want to write about. And I wrote the book, The Wholly Educated MFer. And this book explains, this a motivational book. It ain't even a business book. It's my favorite book I've ever written. And it talks about how we need to just lean in and focus on what we each are purposed to do wholly. Be educated in the space that we know about and stop this epistemic trespassing where we all in other spaces that we don't know about on social media, talking about stuff we don't know about. And we got to be MFers sometimes. You got to have some grit. You got to, sometimes the rules ain't going to work the way you want them to work. Because let me tell you, one time, I love my mama. God knows I do. But when she treated my son that way, I took it personal. And because I took it personal, I did not talk to my mother. Like, you're not going to see my son. I have an expectation that my son be treated fairly. I can't force you to treat him fairly. So I'm going to set a boundary. And my boundary is, if you can't treat him fairly, you're not going to see him. That's what I did. I'm embarrassed by it. It went on for almost a year. But it did two things. My mother shifted. She did. And I, for one of the first times in my life, understood my sibling who did not talk to my mother for years. Because I understood that sometimes things happen that you don't understand until it happens to you. You understand? Until it happens to you. It built my empathy muscle. There's some things you just can't get until it happens to you. And after George Floyd had gotten murdered in front of our eyes, and then Breonna Taylor happened, and we started, the world's like, oh my gosh, I understand calculus now. And now all these people are in the DEI space. Folks who ain't never been in the DEI space. Now they're in the DEI space. And guess what the first thing they want to do is? They want to fix racism in America. Because they more like Malcolm, less like Martin. The number of times that I've heard that statement let me know everything I needed to know about people are at basic algebra at best and not at calculus. Because if you read any of Martin Luther King's work, you will understand that man, nothing soft about that man. The stuff he say in the book, Chaos or Community, most people wouldn't say it today. They'd be too scared. Nothing about you'd be too scared. You'd be too scared. And so I'm out here telling people, hey, listen, you ain't quite there. But the beautiful thing about having narrowed my focus to talk to leaders who had to read, who was at the highest levels of their organization, was that I was getting opportunities with just CEOs, just the richest people in the nation. And because of that, I was talking to a group of people one day, richest Kansas Cityans, and they said, one person said to me, Dr. Price, that was really nice. I live in the Midwest, if you don't know. And when somebody says something like that, you got to start to read the tea leaves. Another one of my mentors said, you got to read the tea leaves. And it took me forever to figure out what that means. Reading the tea leaves is reading what people want, what they mean, even though what they ain't saying it. And he said, "What you just said was fantastic, sugar. This was good. I understand everything you're telling me intellectually. I get the facts. I was hoping you would help me understand it emotionally. Because when I go back to my home, when I'm on my private jet, don't none of this stuff impact me." Once again, I sit back in my chair. Oh my God, I can't believe he said this. Did he just say he don't care nothing about what I said? Yeah. But am I surprised or disappointed? This time I was neither. Because he was honest. And in his honesty, he helped me to know that none of this was going to work if we can't help people have more empathy. That if you don't understand the values of people who feel like they left out, left behind, if you don't understand that people will vote in ways that confound you, if they feel like ultimately it's going to have them being treated like the people who get the legs in this country, the people who got to sit in the back seat, why would I vote for that? I'm too old to need reproductive rights. I'm married. I have an IUD. I don't, whatever. I can have children. IVF don't impact me. Why would I give up my white meat chicken, my wing? And then I got to eat the legs and the thighs. I don't want that. I want to sit in the back. I want to sit in the front. And so then it makes sense to you. And when you understand that, you can. The census, the US Census, has changed the qualification for what it means to be white in this country almost 24 times. Irish didn't used to be white. Italian didn't used to be white. Let me tell you, yeah. Are you surprised, baby, that eventually, because they need more numbers in whiteness so that the browning of America does not happen, that yes, eventually there are certain Latinx people who are going to be white. That's why they're now saying Hispanic, non-Hispanic, white. They're prepping you. There I go with facts again. That part don't matter. I had written this book because hostage negotiators use empathy to get hostages back. They have to understand. When I read Lincoln Rhyme novels, the Bone Crusher, The Empty Chair, the detective has to understand the serial killer in order to get the people back. You watch Criminal Minds, Law and Order. They have to get in the mind of the other person in order to get what they want. It's called tactical empathy. But I had written this whole book. The way I write my books, I write the book and then I go back and write the introduction. I've written the whole book. It was an academic exercise in my experiences and facts. And then something amazing happened. I found out that the man I thought was my daddy was not my daddy. That I have a different biological father. And I was so mad I could spit fire. I wrote an entire book. What I do in order to get my thoughts out is to write. I wrote an entire book. It's a follow-up to The Holy Educated Motherfucker called Redeem. I didn't even pub it. I didn't pub it because it wasn't for other people to read. It was for me. It's hilarious. It's an easy read. It's a good book, just like all the others. But I had to get that anger out because anger is not bad. But I've never seen an angry person in a street fight make strategic decisions. My son is a Muay Thai fighter. When he is prepping for a fight, he's studying the movements. He's getting a greater understanding. He's improving his amount of empathy. Why do I bring this book up? Because I had experienced anger, because I had experienced loneliness, because I had experienced feeling left out and left behind. And listen, for somebody who my dad who raised me, I'm his favorite. You can't tell me amongst my siblings, I'm not the favorite amongst the Price family. You can't tell me that. So I got positionality, and yet I'm the one who's feeling left out. I'm the one who's feeling left behind. I'm the one that people tend to be jealous of sometimes, even when I just walk in spaces. But the Lord gave me the feeling of left out, the feeling of disappointment, the feeling of loneliness, the feeling of anger, the feeling of confusion, losing my identity. Why? Why did I need that? I needed that because feeling the entire range of human emotion helped me to understand empathy. It humanized me. I understand a person up in the hills of West Virginia who sees the world focused on everybody but them. I understand how men can listen to Joe Rogan and feel like, listen, I'm not an effeminate man. I am a very masculine man and I'm not toxic in my masculinity. And why am I being treated this? I understand it. I don't necessarily feel it. That ain't my thing, but I understand it. And why do I understand it? Because of my non-paternity event. And once I got to the other side and I was able to have gratitude and see why certain things happen, I was able to take getting the dark meat chicken, sitting in the back seat of the car, um, even inside organizations, never being able to make it to a certain level of leadership because what I value is humor, justice, and competence. Those three values are probably never going to find their way to the top of any organization in the Fortune 500. Absolutely not. And so when you understand that, then you can know what your next right move is. Now, I ain't ever been a fan of learned helplessness. I'm not one to sit around and go, well, screw all of this. Ain't none of it going to work because I'm just going to get the dark meat chicken. Mm-mm, mm-mm. No, because nothing ever changes if that's how it is. But there's a short-term solution and there are long-term solutions. In the short term, you got to do everything possible in order to make sure that you are healthy and well. But when I think about things like Project 2025, I believe that the document they start working on it in 1981. 81? 81. That's a long-term strategy. If you had paid any take a moment to listen to a Isabel Wilkerson or a Dr. Ibram X. Kendi or a Nicole Hannah Jones, and you understand that some people, no matter what they bring, are never going to get to sit in the front seat. And it don't make sense. It don't make sense until you know the full story, the full history. Because now that I understand that I had a different father, the different treatment makes sense. You see? And in this country, the skin is a stigma. And I have been a Black woman my entire life. I did everything I could to be able to help Madam Vice President win that election because she represents the policy positions I cared about. And being a Black woman my entire life, I was a present day realist, eternal optimist. The joy inspired me because I value humor. The idea of seeing everyone together inspired me because I value inclusivity. But then when I saw how the talking points were going, I was like, we ain't ready yet. We weren't ready in 2008. We weren't ready in 2012. We weren't ready in 2016. And when you listen to people, when you think more like a hostage negotiator, you understand it. And so I want to leave you with a few things, sugar. Part of the reason why I'm able to talk about there's this lady named Dr. Laura Schlesinger. I don't agree with her on many points, but she wrote a book called Bad Childhood, Good Life. And that book helped me because I used to be so upset about not being in the position of the favorite with my mother. But I can tell you, honey, you don't have to try to convince yourself that you're okay. Another thing that was necessary for me to be able to authentically write this book and it be a book filled with empathy and also facts, I had to recognize my emotions, understand my emotions, label those emotions, express them. This is a book of expression. Express those emotions so that then I could regulate. I saw too many of you, my loves, after being woefully heartbroken and disappointed, just get up in the next minute and say, I'm fine. God's got it. It's going to cause you hypertension. Going to make you lose your hair. Going to cause you to want to work all week and then come home, can't get out of the bed on the weekends. Give space to what you think, feel, and believe. And then get up and fight another day. Because you can eat the chicken you want or don't want. And right now, not where you in the backseat of the car because you driving it. It's Filter Free Friday, y'all. We got work to do.